Your money problems didn't start with you. That might feel uncomfortable to hear, because part of you has been carrying the weight of responsibility for years. You've blamed your discipline, your decisions, your lack of strategy. You've told yourself that if you were smarter, more focused, more confident, things would finally change. But what if the struggle didn't begin with your actions, and didn't even begin with your thoughts? What if it began with emotional patterns you inherited before you ever made your first dollar? Long before you understood what money was, your brain was already learning. Not through logic, not through financial education, but through observation, through repetition, through the emotional climate of your home. If tension filled the room whenever bills were discussed, your nervous system recorded that. If money created arguments, silence, fear, or shame, your body memorized those states. And when something is repeated with emotion, the brain wires it in. Children don't analyze, they absorb. You absorbed how your parents reacted to lack. You absorbed their anxiety, their frustration, their survival mode. And because the brain learns through repetition, those emotional reactions became familiar. And here's the hidden mechanism. The body prefers what is familiar, even if it's uncomfortable. If stress around money was repeated often enough, your nervous system began to associate financial matters with tension, with pressure, with instability. That internal state became normal. So now, as an adult, when you think about investing, raising your prices, asking for a promotion, or even checking your bank account, your body reacts before your conscious mind does. A subtle tightening in your chest, a hesitation, procrastination disguised as "I'll deal with it later," and you assume it's laziness or lack of discipline. But it's conditioning. Your brain is not trying to sabotage you. It's trying to keep you within what feels known. And if financial struggle was repeated in your early environment, then struggle feels predictable. And what feels predictable feels safe to the nervous system, even if it limits you. This is why logic alone doesn't fix money patterns. You can read books, watch videos, create spreadsheets, but if your internal state remains wired to stress, you will unconsciously recreate circumstances that match that state. Because the brain and body work together to maintain coherence between what you feel and what you experience. And if, deep down, money feels unsafe, your system will resist it in subtle ways. You might undercharge. You might overspend. You might avoid looking at numbers. You might stay in jobs that feel secure but small. Not because you lack ambition, but because your nervous system equates expansion with uncertainty. And uncertainty, to a system trained in survival mode, feels dangerous. This is not about blame, not about your parents, not about your past. It's about awareness. Because the moment you realize that your financial patterns are learned emotional loops, something shifts. You stop attacking yourself, and you begin observing. But awareness alone is only the first crack in the pattern. Because once you see that your money story was inherited, a deeper question begins to surface. If it didn't start with you, then what exactly are you still unconsciously repeating? You're not just repeating financial behaviors, you're repeating emotional states. And most of the time, you don't even notice it. Think about the last time you had an unexpected expense. Before you said anything out loud, before you calculated anything, something happened internally. A reaction, a shift in your breathing, a tightening, maybe even irritation. That reaction wasn't created in that moment. It was activated. Your brain doesn't respond to money itself. It responds to what money has meant emotionally in your past. And if, growing up, money meant pressure, Your nervous system learned to equate financial events with threat, not physical danger, emotional danger. And the body does not differentiate very well between the two. When you were young, if money conversations led to arguments, your system entered survival mode. Heart rate slightly elevated, muscles subtly contracted, attention narrowed, the body preparing for instability. Now fast forward to today. You open your banking app, you check your credit card statement, you consider negotiating your salary. The same internal chemistry begins to surface. Not because the situation is truly dangerous, but because it feels familiar. The brain is a prediction machine. It constantly uses the past to anticipate the future. And when it recognizes a familiar emotional pattern, it automatically prepares the body for the same outcome. This is why you can intellectually know that you're capable of earning more and still feel resistance. This is why you can set financial goals and unconsciously delay taking action. Because on a deeper level, your body associates financial growth with emotional discomfort. And here's the subtle revelation most people never see. Your system may prefer predictable stress over unfamiliar abundance. Stress, if repeated enough, becomes the baseline. It becomes the emotional home. And when abundance starts to appear, it doesn't feel relaxing. It feels uncertain. Your nervous system whispers, "This is new. Be careful." So you create small disruptions. You miss opportunities. You overthink decisions. You hesitate at critical moments. Not dramatically, subtly, just enough to return to what feels known. This isn't self-sabotage in the dramatic sense people talk about. It's emotional memorization. Your body memorized scarcity before your mind ever questioned it. And attention plays a crucial role here. Whatever you repeatedly focus on strengthens the pattern. If you constantly think about what you lack, your brain reinforces that network. It fires the same circuits, releases the same chemistry, repeats the same internal state. Over time, your personality around money becomes predictable. Careful, defensive, avoidant, over-controlling, and you assume that's just who you are. But it's who you practiced being. The quiet truth is this: your financial reality is often less about numbers and more about the emotional baseline your nervous system is addicted to maintaining. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep trying to change strategies without ever changing the state that drives them. Which leads to a deeper, almost unsettling question. If your body is conditioned to relive emotional scarcity, what else might it be quietly protecting you from? The most dangerous money pattern in your life is the one you don't feel. Not the debt, not the missed opportunity, not even the fear. The real threat is normalization. When stress becomes normal, you stop questioning it. If you grew up watching adults constantly worry about money, your nervous system learned that financial tension is simply part of life. Bills equal pressure. Earning equals exhaustion. Success equals responsibility and risk. And when something is repeated enough times, the brain stops flagging it as unusual. It becomes background noise. Here's where it gets subtle. If your internal state is calibrated to mild financial anxiety, you will unconsciously create conditions that keep that anxiety alive. Not because you want suffering, but because the brain is wired for coherence. It wants your external world to match your internal chemistry. So if your body is used to low-grade stress around money, peace can feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels unsafe. This is how survival mode becomes an identity. In survival mode, attention narrows. You focus on immediate threats. You think short-term. You protect what you have instead of expanding. Your decisions become reactive instead of creative. You might say you want abundance, but if your nervous system is living in survival, your behavior will prioritize safety over possibility. And the shift from survival to creation doesn't happen through positive thinking. It happens when you notice how your body reacts before your mind rationalizes. Imagine receiving an unexpected financial opportunity, a new client, a raise, a chance to invest. Pay attention to the first reaction: excitement or tension? Do you immediately think about what could go wrong? Do you scan for potential loss? That scanning is your nervous system doing what it was trained to do: anticipate instability. When this response repeats over years, it quietly shapes your financial ceiling. You won't take risks that feel emotionally unsafe. You won't hold on to larger sums comfortably. You won't expand beyond what your body considers manageable. And here's the invisible part: you'll justify it logically. I'm just being responsible. I don't want to be greedy. It's not the right time. But beneath those thoughts is a conditioned internal state that equates expansion with threat. The body memorizes emotional experiences more powerfully than the mind memorizes information. If past financial strain triggered fear repeatedly, your system encoded money as something that requires vigilance, constant vigilance. And vigilance is exhausting. Over time, your baseline becomes subtle fatigue around financial decisions. Avoidance becomes easier than confrontation. Small becomes safer than growth. You stay within limits not because you lack capacity, but because your nervous system is guarding against a future that hasn't happened. The threat isn't poverty. The threat is remaining emotionally loyal to a past environment that no longer exists. And until that loyalty becomes visible to you, it will quietly steer your choices. Because what feels like caution might actually be conditioning protecting an old version of you. And the moment you begin to see that, another question surfaces. If survival mode has been driving your financial life, what would change if your body finally felt safe enough to create instead of protect? You've probably said this before: I'm just not good with money. And every time you repeat that sentence, something inside you nods in agreement. But that sentence didn't come from nowhere. It was built from repeated emotional experiences. Built from moments when you felt small, confused, overwhelmed, or ashamed around financial situations. Built from watching others struggle and quietly deciding, without realizing it, that this was simply how life works. At some point, money stopped being neutral. It became personal. If your parents fought about it, money became conflict. If there was never enough, money became scarcity. If someone controlled others through it, money became power or submission. And as a child, you didn't analyze those dynamics. You embodied them. The brain learns fastest when emotion is involved. Strong feelings signal importance. So if money conversations carried intensity, your nervous system tagged those moments as significant. It stored them not just as memories, but as internal states. Over time, those states fused with identity. I'm bad at managing money. People like us don't get rich. It's selfish to want more. Having money changes people. These aren't just thoughts. They are rehearsed emotional positions, and repetition turns positions into personality. When you repeatedly feel anxious while paying bills, your body learns anxiety as part of your financial identity. When you feel guilt spending on yourself, your system memorizes guilt as a normal response to receiving. So now, as an adult, when money enters your life, your reaction feels natural, automatic, logical. But it's not logic. It's conditioning. And the most powerful conditioning is the one that feels like me. If you identify as someone who struggles financially, Your attention will unconsciously search for evidence to confirm that identity. You'll remember the mistakes more than the wins. You'll magnify losses. You'll downplay successes because the brain loves consistency. Consistency equals safety. If you suddenly begin earning more, part of you may feel uncomfortable not because you can't handle the money, but because it disrupts the story you've been rehearsing for years. And disrupting identity feels threatening to the nervous system. This is why change feels exhausting. You're not just trying to learn new strategies. You're challenging an emotional self-image that was reinforced hundreds, maybe thousands of times. The body says, "Stay who you've been." It's predictable. Even if who you've been includes stress, even if who you've been includes limitation. Deep down, the question isn't, "How do I make more money?" It's, "Who am I allowed to be in relation to money?" And that question touches something much deeper than budgeting or investing. It touches belonging. Because if your family normalized struggle, stepping beyond it can feel like betrayal. If scarcity bonded people together, abundance might feel isolating. So sometimes, without realizing it, you stay loyal to the emotional atmosphere you grew up in, not consciously, biologically. And once you begin to see how identity, emotion, and repetition intertwine, another tension begins to build. If the person you've been around money was conditioned, then who are you without that conditioning? Here's where it becomes uncomfortable. You say you want financial freedom, but parts of you are organized around financial struggle, and both can't coexist. This is the tension most people never resolve. On the surface, you set goals, you visualize success, you promise yourself you'll do better. But beneath that conscious intention is a nervous system that has been trained by repetition to expect something else. Expectation is powerful. If your internal state is calibrated to anticipate lack, you will subtly interpret neutral events as threats. A slow sales week becomes proof that it's happening again. Seth, a small setback feels like confirmation of an old story. Your attention locks onto what matches your conditioning, and whatever you repeatedly focus on strengthens the neural circuits behind it. So even when opportunities appear, you may downplay them. Even when you make progress, you may dismiss it, because acknowledging growth requires loosening the grip on a familiar emotional identity. The brain resists identity disruption more than it resists discomfort. Let that sink in. It would rather keep you consistent than keep you comfortable. This is why you can work harder than ever and still feel like you're running in place. Because effort alone doesn't override conditioning. If the internal state remains the same, the external patterns tend to reorganize around it. You might earn more and increase your spending to match. You might receive a raise and suddenly encounter unexpected expenses. You might build momentum and then procrastinate at a critical moment. Not dramatically, just enough to return to baseline. Your system is trying to restore emotional familiarity. And here's the deeper layer. Stress itself can become addictive. When your body has lived in survival mode for years, stress hormones feel normal. Calm can feel empty. Expansion can feel unstable. Creativity can feel irresponsible. So when things begin to stabilize financially, your nervous system may unconsciously generate problems just to reintroduce that familiar chemistry. An argument, a risky decision, a last-minute financial panic. It's not conscious sabotage. It's the body seeking coherence with what it has practiced most. And until you bring awareness to this dynamic, you'll continue fighting the surface, while the deeper program runs uninterrupted. This is cognitive tension at its core. You are trying to create abundance with a nervous system trained for scarcity. You are trying to expand with an identity built around contraction. You are trying to think differently without first noticing how you've been feeling automatically. And awareness always comes before effort. Because if you attempt to force change without observing the internal pattern, you simply layer new goals on top of old conditioning. So the real question isn't, how do I make more money? It's, what emotional state have I been rehearsing every time money enters my awareness? Because that state is shaping your behavior more than your strategy ever could. And once you see that clearly, something subtle but powerful begins to shift. If the pattern has been rehearsed, then it can be interrupted. But interruption requires something most people avoid: stillness. Stillness feels unproductive to a mind trained in financial pressure. But what if the breakthrough you're chasing doesn't require more effort? It requires less automatic reaction? Most people try to solve money stress by doing more. More planning, more working, more strategizing. But if the internal state driving those actions remains wired to survival, the results will keep circling back to the same emotional baseline. Creation mode is different. Survival mode scans for danger. Creation mode scans for possibility. You cannot access both at the same time. When your nervous system feels safe, your attention widens. You see options instead of obstacles. You respond instead of react. Decisions become intentional instead of defensive. But safety is not created by external numbers first. It's created internally. And this is where real possibility begins. The moment you pause and observe your automatic reaction to money, without judging it, you interrupt the repetition. Awareness slows the loop. It separates you from the memorized state. Instead of instantly tightening when you check your account, you notice the tightening. Instead of immediately panicking about a bill, you observe the surge of emotion rising in your body. That observation alone creates space, and space is powerful. Because when you are no longer fully identified with the reaction, you are no longer completely controlled by it. This is not about forcing positive emotions, it's about shifting from unconscious reaction to conscious awareness. When the body feels seen instead of suppressed, it begins to regulate. The nervous system gradually learns that the present moment is not the past. That this bill is not the same argument you witnessed as a child. That this opportunity is not the same instability your family feared. Repetition created the old pattern. Repetition can create the new one. But this time, you're choosing the internal state deliberately. Imagine approaching a financial decision from calm instead of urgency, from clarity instead of pressure, from grounded attention instead of scattered fear. At first, it may feel unnatural. Because you are practicing a state your body hasn't rehearsed enough. But every time you remain present instead of reactive, you teach your brain something new. You teach it that money does not equal danger. You teach it that expansion does not equal chaos. You teach it that stability can coexist with growth. And slowly, coherence begins to form between your internal state and the future you say you want. This is real possibility. Not because you changed your bank balance overnight, but because you shifted the state that influences every financial decision you make. And when enough decisions are made from a regulated, creative internal state, your external reality begins to reorganize. Not magically, systematically. Yet here's the deeper turning point most people hesitate to cross. If you are no longer defined by inherited emotional scarcity, then your relationship with money is no longer predetermined, which means the next move isn't about fixing your past. It's about choosing who you become next. There comes a moment when you realize nothing outside of you is actually holding you back. Not the economy, not your upbringing, not even your past mistakes. What's been holding the pattern in place is an internal agreement you never consciously signed. An agreement to stay emotionally consistent with who you've been. And the second you see that clearly, something inside you begins to loosen. Because if your money problems didn't start with you, then they also don't have to end with you repeating them. But here's the turning point. You cannot create a new financial reality while emotionally rehearsing the old one. The brain changes through repetition, yes. But repetition of what? If you keep revisiting stress in your mind, replaying worst-case scenarios, anticipating lack, your nervous system continues firing the same circuits. The body keeps producing the same chemistry. And that chemistry reinforces the same personality. A personality shaped by caution, by contraction, by survival. To shift, you must practice a different internal state before the external evidence appears. That feels risky, because you've been conditioned to let circumstances dictate how you feel. If I have enough money, I'll relax. If things are stable, I'll feel safe. When I succeed, I'll feel confident. But this sequence keeps you trapped. Because the external world is often a reflection of the internal baseline you rehearse most. Creation mode reverses the order. You cultivate the state first. Calm before confirmation. Confidence before proof. Stability before numbers change. Not through pretending, through intentional attention. When you sit with a financial thought and choose not to spiral, you are rewiring. When you make a decision from grounded clarity instead of urgency, you are rewiring. When you allow yourself to imagine expansion without immediately scanning for danger, you are rewiring. And at first, the old identity will resist. It will whisper, "This isn't realistic. Don't get your hopes up. Be careful." That voice isn't truth. It's memory. It's your nervous system trying to keep you within familiar territory. But familiar is not the same as aligned. The more you observe that voice without obeying it, the weaker it becomes. Because attention is fuel. What you repeatedly energize grows stronger. What you stop feeding begins to dissolve. Over time, the emotional charge around money softens. Bills become numbers, not threats. Opportunities become invitations, not risks. Growth becomes expansion, not instability. You begin to respond from intention instead of inheritance, and this is where the real shift happens. Not when your income doubles, not when your debt disappears, but when your internal state no longer collapses at the thought of money, when your body feels safe enough to hold more. And once that safety becomes your new baseline, something powerful unfolds quietly. You stop asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" And you start asking, "What am I ready to create next?" At some point, you stop trying to fix your money problems, and you start understanding them. That's the quiet integration most people miss. You realize your financial patterns were never proof of inadequacy. They were evidence of repetition, of emotional conditioning, of a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. And instead of fighting yourself, you begin working with yourself. You notice the reaction without becoming it. You feel the old tension without obeying it. You recognize survival mode without letting it lead. This is not dramatic. It's subtle. But subtle shifts in internal state change entire trajectories over time. Because when your brain no longer associates money with danger, your attention changes. You stop scanning for what might go wrong and start noticing what could go right. You become available for solutions that were always there, but invisible under stress. Stress narrows perception. Coherence expands it. When your internal state is regulated, your decisions align more naturally with long-term growth. You no longer chase urgency. You no longer avoid responsibility. You no longer oscillate between fear and impulsiveness. You move steadily. And steady is powerful. This is where true financial change begins, not in a spreadsheet, but in the relationship between your thoughts, your body, and your attention. When those three are aligned, you create differently. You invest differently. You negotiate differently. You spend differently. You earn differently, not because you forced yourself, but because your identity shifted quietly beneath the surface. The inherited emotional charge dissolves through awareness and new repetition. And with enough practice, calm becomes familiar. Expansion becomes familiar. Receiving becomes familiar. And what is familiar feels safe. Your body no longer braces at the thought of more. Your nervous system no longer equates growth with instability. Your attention no longer feeds scarcity automatically. You step into creation mode not as a temporary mindset, but as a baseline. And from that baseline, money is no longer a trigger. It's a tool, a neutral resource that responds to clarity, intention, and consistency. Your problems didn't start with you, but your awareness does. And that awareness is where the cycle changes. Not overnight, not magically, but decisively. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you stop emotionally rehearsing scarcity, the future is no longer a repetition of the past. It becomes a choice. If this shifted the way you see your relationship with money, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. There's much more to explore about how your brain, your nervous system, and your internal state shape the life you experience.